Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores Through a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I am so happy to be here with you today. Every week, I join with my partner, Kimberly Hensel Lawrence, to travel across the country visiting independent bookstores and the authors who love them. Today, we are in Salt Lake City, Utah, at the King's English with independent bookstore owner Calvin Crosby and best-selling author Mackenzi Lee. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
For anybody who doesn't know, Mackenzi Lee's debut novel, This Monstrous Thing, won the PEN New England Susan P. Bloom Children's Book Discovery Award. Her second novel, The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, was a New York Times bestseller, an ABA bestseller, has been published in over 20 countries around the world, was awarded a 2018 Stonewall Book Award honor and the New England Book Award, and is currently being adapted for HBO by Greg Berlanti. The sequel, The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy, debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list and made critical praise. Mackenzi is also the author of Bygone Badass Broads, a collection of short biographies of women in history you probably don't know about, but you should. She's currently working on a series for Marvel. She was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 class of 2020, and she lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, where she works as an independent bookseller. Mackenzi's final book in the Montague series, The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks, is out November 16th. Congratulations, Mackenzi. That is a long and impressive bio.
That's too long. I got to cut that down. I just sit here.
I mean, I cut it. That was the edited version. The problem is you have too many accomplishments. But I'm going to go to you first, Mackenzi, because we are here today with the King's English, because it is your beloved independent bookstore. You nominated it. So go ahead and tell us what makes it so great.
So I grew up in Salt Lake City. I grew up coming to the King's English bookstore. I remember my initial impressions being that it was like, this is what you want your like small indie local bookstore to be. It has these like, I was so enchanted by like the little narrow hallway that sneaks up from the counter to the mystery room. And I don't think we even had the big kids room we have now back then, but I was so charmed by this sort of like sagging old house where everything sat just a little bit askew and there were books everywhere, and it just felt like a home full of books, which was always look behind me, it's always been my greatest aspiration to have a home full of books. And it's always been a constant in my life that it was somewhere I would come back to. I moved away for a long time and would always come back to King's English when I was in Salt Lake City visiting my family, whether to shop or to do book events or whatever. And now I live here and I work here, and it is just as charming from the other side of the counter.
That's awesome. I love that. Calvin, you are a repeat guest on Authors Love Bookstores, but the last time we were with you, or you were with us, I guess you were not at that moment actually a bookstore owner. And I guess it's something you've been in and out of, but before we went live, you were saying how happy you were to be back. Tell us about it. What's it like?
It is amazing. And weirdly, if you take out all the best-selling author and awards that Mackenzi has had, our story's the same. I grew up in Salt Lake, and coming to the bookstore was always my happy, safe place. And every trip back, because my family's still here, it included coming to the bookstore and just being in that space. But in general, being back in the store and being able to put books in people's hands, I am living my best possible life.
I love that. I love hearing that. Mackenzi, I know that when you were at least in graduate school, you were sort of back in the area that I'm in now, in the Boston area, and I think you had mentioned that you had done bookselling back here. Tell us about like your background as a bookseller and why it's something you've stuck with, even as your career as an author has kind of blasted off into the stratosphere.
I'll answer that in reverse. I've stuck with it because I'm really bossy and I love to tell people what to read. And I think my opinions are the best and I want to force them on other people. So I went to grad school back in Boston. And while I was there, I was doing an MFA and I got a job at a bookstore at the Harvard Coop, which is like sort of a indie bookstore, sort of a Barnes and Noble kind of weird hybrid thing. And I sort of thought this will be like the retail job that I suffer through while I'm in graduate school. This will be like the hardship that I someday talk about as a best-selling author. This will be like the grind that I had to work to get here. And then I loved it, and it was the best part of my life for a long time. And I ended up working at Porter Square Books, which is in Cambridge. And I was also working like as a temp at a publishing house at the time, and so I was working 5 days a week plus writing, plus then like book selling on the weekends. So I just like I couldn't step away. And then I ended up working full time for Trident Booksellers in Boston for a while, and was their events manager and had a lovely time with that space, which is like a bar, and we got to do all these weird, fun, crazy events, and they just kind of like let me dream big, which was really, really fun. And now I'm back in Salt Lake. I moved here when I started writing full time again, and I'm very grateful that the King's English took me on.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Well, I want to talk event. Trident does have great events, and I want to talk events in just a minute. But before we get to events, a couple of quick things. First, to the online audience, both people who are watching us live now and people who look at this video in the future, we are here today to support the King's English at a time that's very difficult for independent bookstores, and also at a time when you need to be buying books immediately because they're not going to be available in December for the holidays. So links to the King's English are in the chat. Click, go to the store, pick up a signed copy of Mackenzi's books because they are available there, and pick up a lot of other books too. That's my plug for the moment. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Let's talk. I want to talk. I want to talk about success. I want to talk about publishing success, and let's crack the publishing industry because we have we have two experienced booksellers, and then Mackenzi. I mean, you are just like a multi-time New York Times best-selling, award-winning author, especially with the Montague series. It's in those books are sort of household names, I think, at this point. I mean, like very, very clearly, you you cracked the code, or you caught the wave, or sort of or something. And I'm going to go to you first, and then I'll go to Calvin second. But I mean, how do you think it works? Like, what do you think it is? What do you think is the chemistry that can sort of make a book sort of take off like that? And how much do you think booksellers have to do with it? Like, can booksellers shape the taste? Can booksellers promote a book and really help it to break through? Or are booksellers just kind of chasing the waves like everybody else?
Oh boy. I don't know how publishing works. Don't ask me to crack it, please. That's too much pressure. I I think that the books took off because of a combination of timing, and it was right place, right time. And there's an element of luck to it, but also an element of doing the thing that I didn't feel like I had permission to do, but that nobody else was doing. Um, and in terms of booksellers, so Gentleman's Guide is a book that now I think looks like it had a big marketing budget behind it, but it really didn't, especially because my first book with the same publisher was wildly unread, and no one was excited to market my books. And at the time, it was 2015, I think, when I pitched Gentleman's Guide. It came out in 2017. There was not the plethora of LGBTQIA literature there is now, and so it was also a really hard sell to say, like, I'm not only going to write a weird historical fiction novel, which is the genre that nobody buys in YA. I'm also going to write about queer people. Nobody was excited about this book, but I was. And because I was a bookseller at the time, I relied really, really heavily on my bookseller networks. And I think booksellers really can make a difference if they're willing to look at books other than the ones that are maybe being foisted upon them by sales reps, or which is great. Like, absolutely read those books. But also, when you look into the backlist, when you look into the catalog that isn't maybe being pitched as aggressively to you, when you look beyond the sort of bestsellers and big names, I think it absolutely can have an impact. I know with Gentleman's Guide, it wouldn't have gotten where it was without booksellers, because I was literally like Kinko's printing off manuscripts to send to my friends who were at bookstores.
Mm.
I put together my own like indie bookstore tour across the country, and I was doing red eye flights. I was sleeping on bookseller couches and then like driving with them to the store to do the event. And it really like I had so much support from the indie bookstore community with this book. It was a #1 indie next pick, which was like a huge factor in getting my publisher excited about it. It was a big sort of like I can't overstate how much indie booksellers helped this book, but I also know that part of that was because I had a really lovely, solid community behind me who knew me and loved me and wanted to help and support me.
I love that. I love that. And I love, I mean, frankly, it's just like so inspirational, you know, for authors, you know, like printing out the copies at Kinko's, couch surfing across the country, sending it out. I mean, I think it's just like, I love stories like that and so inspirational. Calvin, I'm gonna switch over to you. So, I mean, you've seen Mackenzie become, you know, a famous author. You've also seen plenty of books come and go and not make a splash. What's it all about? What's your insight?
But
That's
I
the
have
billion. It's the $1 billion question. It is nice to watch someone like Mackenzie who really does the groundswell work and knows the importance of the independent book channel to use that and become successful. Because I think the independent book channel's respected, but I don't think that the true power of what we do, because we are trusted, and when we like a book and we put it in the customer's hands, we are potentially changing their lives into generations. So yeah, I don't know how to crack publishing, even having worked in it.
Yeah, no, I think that's generally the answer, but I love your response. I think that's great.
sorry, can I drop off?
Yeah.
The thing that always amazes me and that I sort of didn't grasp the reach of until I actually started working in bookstores was how much one person's feelings about a book can really like push that book into the world and push that book into readers' hands. So the first bookstore I worked at, the Harvard Coop, I had just read what is still my all-time favorite book, the book my dog is named after, which is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein. And when I started working there, I don't remember how long the book had been out, but it had been out at least a year because I'd read it the year before in grad school. And in its total lifetime, they had sold 3 copies of it. And in the first month I worked there, I sold 40 copies of this book because I just couldn't shut up about it. And because I literally would I would be pitching this to somebody. They'd come in and be like, "Do you have any baby books?" And I'd be like, "Actually, what I think you mean is you want this World War II spy novel." And then I would start to cry as I was talking about it because I just loved this book. And so I was like selling this book to people who didn't want it. And it became one of their like bestsellers at this bookstore because I was just a really aggressive book pusher and really enthusiastic about my opinions. And I think that really cemented for me just how much that, and now like at King's English, where it's so fun to be working at a store where the customers have such personal relationships with the booksellers and they've known some of these booksellers for so long. And there's people who will come in and see somebody's bookmark in that says like Mackenzie recommends or Calvin recommends, and that's all they need. And they'll buy it just based off that because they know us and they know what we like and they trust us. And it's just I was going to say the power, but that makes it sound very nefarious. It's incredible. It's such a cool thing to be on both sides of, really.
That's really cool. I love that. I love that. And I mean, Codename Verity is a great book. And I love the idea that there's all these like Harvard law students walking around with like Codename Verity and like they don't understand contract law because you talk them out of that textbook, but like they read Codename Verity, which is probably better. That's awesome. Okay, I mean, let's talk events because for the audience, if you happen to be in the neighborhood, Mackenzie will be at the King's English for the law.
Virtual, so you don't even have to be in the neighborhood.
Virtual. Sorry, it doesn't matter where you are.
Our name.
Go virtually to the King's English on November 16th for the launch of Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks. We put the link in the chat to the event. Let's talk about events. And again, Mackenzie, I'm going to go to you first. You've seen tons of events from both sides, I guess, as the author and also as the person running the events. You mentioned your work at Trident. What I always loved about events back when they used to happen in a sort of unencumbered live way was kind of their unpredictability and quirkiness, and just, I would show up at events where I had no idea who the author was, just to kind of see what happened. Anything come to your mind as kind of epitomizing the live literary event, or a story that sticks in your mind as especially funny or strange or inspirational or anything?
Or just spill the tea on how weird authors are.
Yeah.
So what immediately comes to my mind is a story of one of my own events, not one that I worked as a bookseller, but one I did as an author. It was actually the first event for Gentleman's Guide. So I am a big audiobook reader, and I'll shout out Libro FM, which is the independent bookstore equivalent of Audible, where you can buy the same audiobooks, but your money goes back to your local independent bookstore instead of to the evil overlords at Amazon. And I love audiobooks. I was a big audiobook kid. I had my parents bought my sister and I both little cassette players that we could walk around and listen to books on tape constantly on. And so I wanted an audiobook. That was like my ultimate author bucket list item. And my first one didn't get an audiobook. They decided not to do it because, again, it was wildly unread. And so the second one with Gentleman's Guide, this was the other reason it succeeded. It was indie bookstores and me just being a huge pain in the ass, because I just relentlessly emailed my editor saying, is there going to be an audiobook? Do we have any audiobook news? Do you think you could check in on the audiobook again? Do you know if you're not going to do the audiobook, maybe I could get the audiobook? And they finally just were like, okay, please stop. And it worked. And they produced an audiobook, and the audiobook is narrated by Christian Coulson, who's a British actor. And he is phenomenal. And the audiobook, I got the audiobook from my publisher. I was super excited, but I was like, I will listen to like 3 words of this and then I will probably turn it off, because hearing your own words is really weird, and hearing them read by somebody else is weird. And it's sort of like hearing your own voice on an answering machine and being like, God, do I really sound like that? But he does such a good job with this book. And I tell people the audiobook is the best version of the book that exists, because he took everything I was doing and then did it better and funnier and like performed it. It's a wonderful audiobook. And so I had been very vocal on social media about how much I loved the audiobook. And he ended up, I think we were on Twitter, and he ended up following me and I followed him, and we were DMing back and forth, just sort of like mutually fan clubbing each other, because I loved him and he loved the book, and it was great. And I mentioned to him, because he said he was in New York, and he's like, if you're ever in New York, let me know. And I was like, well, I have my launch event in New York in a couple of weeks. Do you want to come and maybe read from the book? And he was like, yeah, I'd love to. I have something that night. So he couldn't get there until like the event was halfway through. And I was like, that's fine. It's totally fine. I've never met this guy before. We'd only like texted. And I listened to his voice reading the blowjob scenes I wrote. It's fine. So we were like texting the day of, and he was like, I don't know if I'm going to be there until the end. And I'm like, that's fine. We'll just do the event. And then when you get here, we'll do the reading. It'll be fine. And he said, do you have like a section picked out for me to read? And I was like, yeah, I'll flag it. I'll leave a copy at the counter. So we were at Books of Wonder. I was doing this event. I was talking with my friend Claire. And all of a sudden, like this ripple passes through the room as young Tom Riddle from Harry Potter movies walks in. And he's very handsome and he's very British. And sat down next to me, and I was very starstruck because he's handsome and British. And he was like, oh, so I'm just going to read. And I had marked a passage pretty early in the book that is a fairly like innocuous scene as far as this book goes. And it's just sort of Monty and Percy like flirting with each other. And there's like one masturbation joke, but I was like, oh, my mom's in the crowd and she might not love this, but we'll get through it. And I had flagged that for him. And I was like, maybe you could read that. And in his lovely British way, he's like, actually, on the train over here, I was thinking about my favorite part to perform, and I thought I'd read that instead. And he shows it to me. And it's the scene that starts with a hand job and ends with like naked streaking through Versailles. And he very sincerely looked at me and was like, is that all right? And I went, my mom's here. And he very concerned was like, oh, has she not read it yet? And I'm like, no, spoilers are not the issue here. And so I just like sat the color of a strawberry next to him the whole time as he read this scene, and talk about like not knowing where to look, like not knowing what to do with my hands. And he did a great job, and it was so fun. And he's so lovely and actually does the audio. This is my sneaky plug. He actually does the Nobleman's Guide audio as well. And so he's doing the event with me on the 16th. We're doing a virtual conversation. So who knows what'll happen.
Oh,
that was one my most memorable and unpredictable event.
I mean, This is our 75th episode, and you win memorable and unpredictable events. So congratulations. You have like crushed,
And me and
um,
Tom Riddle and hand jobs at Versailles.
I mean, I have to tell you, like we had Judy Blume on, and like she had nothing like that. Lovely stories, but nothing like that. All right, Calvin, we're gonna come over to you. So that is a tough act to follow. But events that are memorable, strange, unpredictable.
Well, number one, I have to reinforce that the audio is phenomenal. So even if you've read it, you need to download the audio on Libro and listen to it. Memorable events for me, it seems like so long ago that I was doing in-person events. It's the weirdest thing to think how much virtual has replaced all that we did before. I miss the food series. We did a lot of food when I was at Book Passage with restaurants and stuff. And I think, we were able to host Bourdain and Nigella Lawson and Marcus Samuelson and all these amazing chefs, Ottolenghi. If there's anything I miss, I think I miss the food.
Yeah, I hear that. The food and the drinks.
And the drinks, even though COVID shows that I don't miss the food.
Right. I'm totally with you on that.
Can I share an event story that's not as wild? It's going to be anticlimactic, but I'm going to say it anyway. Yeah. So when I worked at Trident, the fun thing about Trident is they have a restaurant and bar. This is Calvin made me think of this, attached to the bookstore. And so because of that, we could get revenue from events that wasn't tied into actual book sales. And so when I showed up, I was like, can I plan endless theme parties? And they were like, yes. And so that was like mostly my job there, was just like hosting increasingly ridiculous theme parties. And so one of the things we did that was really, really popular was we would do murder mystery dinners. And I would write them because I'm a ridiculous overachiever. And so we did, like, the first one was Downton Abbey, and it was super fun, and we sold out really fast. And the second one was like Stranger Things. And for Stranger Things, we were like, it'd be fun. We're going to make waffles because they have the Eggo waffles in Stranger Things, and we'll serve like Coca-Cola and pudding packs. And it was so much fun. And the last one I did before I left was Hamilton themed. And so all of the food we served was Hamilton puns, which really was like the height of my writing career, so we had like, pardon me, are you Aaron Burger? And we had history has its fries on you. And I believe our dessert was pie, because it was look around at how lucky we are to eat a pie right now. I was really proud of those, and I don't feel like they quite got their due, so I needed to air them out right now. And because we had, with these murder mystery dinners, we would sell a certain amount of tickets, but we never quite knew how many people would actually show up. So I'd always write in about like 5 characters that could be removed from the story if they needed to be. And by the end, by doing this Hamilton one, I was just like, I was off the leash, writing the most nutso things ever. So part of the plot of our Hamilton murder mystery, because everyone had like secrets they had to keep from everyone else. And so one of the secrets was that James Madison was actually dead, and Thomas Jefferson had been Weekend at Bernie'sing him for the entire time. Like the person playing Madison couldn't do anything without Thomas Jefferson. The King George had like an attendant that had to make sure everyone's head was lower than the king, and so of course he always gave that to the tallest person, was the king. And the best one was the most inessential character to the murder mystery was Lin-Manuel Miranda, who was a time traveler but couldn't let anyone know he was a time traveler, but could only speak in freestyle raps.
You should be very proud of that creation. You should be like, I know you've won a bunch of awards and like stuff like that, but like you should be very proud of that work.
It was right before, I didn't know it at the time, but it was right before I ended up quitting that job to write full time. And so I feel like that was really like my swan song.
Oh yeah, that was definitely a swan song. I love that. That's awesome. I want to go into a question with you guys about genre, actually, but before I do, I'm just going to pause for a second, because Mackenzi, a lot of people who watch this show or sort of follow this are writers or like aspiring writers, and are oftentimes interested in some of the inside baseball stuff about writing and publishing and stuff like that. And so I'm going to ask you kind of like a very specific question, but I think people will appreciate it. Like just listening to your story and sort of listening to you talk about how you've advocated for yourself in your career, like I love the piece about like your audiobook and getting your publisher to, you know, to kind of like to make an audiobook. I love the piece about sort of going from Kinko's and like pitching directly to the bookstores. I think a lot of authors feel like they're not supposed to do that. Like they sort of feel like they're not supposed to like get out there and like, you know, push their own work directly with their editors, their publishing houses, with booksellers, with sort of, you know, whoever. And or sort of feel like they should go through their agent, you know, like I sort of feel like I with my debut book, I always felt like I can't talk to anyone. I have to talk to my agent and let him handle it because I'm going to mess it up. So kind of set us straight on that. I mean, it sounds like you have just, I don't know if your agent was also doing this stuff or if you just kind of shoved your agent out of your way and got out there yourself, or like, set us straight.
It was me. And I will say it's only successful like 43% of the time. It doesn't always work. And I've pitched myself for a lot of things that didn't end up happening. And I've had a lot of fall on my face encounters with booksellers or other authors or anything I've tried to like put myself out there for. So it's a lot of rejection. Um, uh, I don't know what was the thrust of your question though. I got caught up.
Well, I mean, is it basically, is it okay for authors to sort of to do that? Is it okay for authors just to kind of like dispense with the publicist and the agent and all of that stuff and to just get out there and advocate?
I would say make sure they know what you're doing and keep them in the loop, but also and be respectful. Like be respectful of booksellers and of bookstores and their space and their time. And I know that from working on the other side, we have authors at the stores I've worked at in the past that it's sort of like, oh boy, like here she comes again. She's got a new book. We're going to be hearing from her every day for the next 17 years. Like, don't be a dick about it. Sorry. I didn't ask what the content warning on this was.
There's no content warning. It's fine.
Like be respectful, but also I hit a point with Gentleman's Guide where I realized I was the only advocate for this book. Nobody else was going to push it off the mid list. And my agent wasn't super helpful. My publicist, I don't remember if I had a publicist officially for this book. But I kind of had a gut feeling about it. And I had a gut feeling that it was hitting at the right time in terms of like queer rep was coming up in YA, and like Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda had just come out and there were people who wanted that. And I also had a gut feeling about just people want funny, happy queer books. And so I just kind of bet on myself. And I definitely think it's worth doing, but you have to be respectful of other people in the industry, know that other people have jobs they're doing. Your publicist has a job, your agent has a job, and also know that it's not going to work every single time.
That's great advice. I mean, Mackenzi, if we had a time machine, I would like ask you to go back and to talk to me when my debut novel was coming out, because like you're saying exactly what I needed to hear.
I talked to myself during my debut because I think too, we kind of, as authors, we fall into this place where suddenly the work you're doing is also like your biggest dream of your life. So you're accomplishing this big dream, and so you don't want to do anything to mess it up. And you kind of get in this mentality of like, I'm just so happy to be here. I have to say yes to everything. I have to say thank you for everything. I have to never put up a fight and just be like glad to have a seat at the table. When really, especially I think for authors for queer authors, for BIPOC authors, for anyone who does not sort of fit the traditional model of successful white male straight author, you have to advocate for yourself and you have to realize that you are an asset for your publisher. Your book is making them money, not the opposite way around. And you don't need to just sort of fall into this like different gratitude all the time. Like you can stand up for yourself. Yeah. And
yes, I just love that. I love that. And before this turns into like a therapy session for me, I'm gonna ship. We do have an audience question actually that I'm gonna put. I don't know if you'll be able to see it from your phones. I'm gonna put it on the screen, but I'll also read it aloud. And Calvin, I'm gonna go to you on this one. It says, "Good evening from abroad. I would like to know if you are going to continue organizing online events even after the pandemic." Calvin, are online events here to stay?
They are here to stay. The efficiency for the publishers, there's no travel budget or there's limited travel budget. I don't see the frequency of in-person events occurring the way that it used to with touring authors. But I will say, and this goes back to what Mackenzi just said, if you understand the independent channel as an author, you can engage now in a different way. There's opportunities in this that you can engage with us by knowing who we are and how you don't lead with your Amazon rating or your Amazon sell sheet. You actually understand what the bookstore is about. But there will be opportunities for local authors with big houses and small houses to have real events once and if we get past this pandemic.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. I think there are huge advantages to it. Okay, I do want to touch on genre before we get into book recommendations. And Calvin, I'm gonna start off with you here, and then I'll come around to Mackenzie. But Mackenzie is, certainly a giant within the world of young adult literature. And I wonder if you would just talk a little bit about that genre in particular, about YA lit, about what its status is at this point, about the degree to which YA lit is crossing over to adult readers, and sort of what you think the trend in that is at this point.
So YA has blended with adult fiction for decades at this point. But what I think is important is what we're seeing in YA that we didn't see initially is that there are more marginalized communities being represented. There are more queer, there are more BIPOC. We have a section that, thankfully, we also have Mackenzie to curate it, that we call On the Edge. And it is really all those books that when adults, I'm using air quotes here, first discovered YA, weren't there. It is a beautiful thing to see the stories that are being told now for people of color and queer people in the YA genre.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Mackenzie, I'm going to ask you a slightly different genre question, which is, again, I mean, sort of you sort of occupied sort of the YA space in this very prominent way. Was that destined? Were you always going to be a YA writer? Is there a Mackenzi Lee adult horror novel in a drawer somewhere that we don't know about? Sort of what's been your relationship with it?
So I came of age in a time when YA was not, I think there were a few YA, but my memory of YA literature as a teenager is like Go Ask Alice. And so I was the kind of reader, I was a really voracious reader as a kid, but I was not a very good reader. And so anything that sort of challenged me, anything that pushed me a little bit in terms of my skills or my not content skills so much as just like basic reading skills, I was not interested in. Mm-hmm. And so when I hit sort of the age where I had aged out of children's books, and now mostly what I was reading was either adult books or stuff that I was assigned in school, I just stopped reading. And I didn't read most of the classics that were assigned to me in English because they made me feel like an idiot and I couldn't understand them and I thought they were boring and I hated them. And so I just sort of had very negative associations with reading for a long time because reading was something I was forced to do by teachers I didn't like. And when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was doing a history degree with the plan to go on and do a PhD. And for some reason, I thought academic writing would be more interesting to me. But I was doing this history degree. I was living in the UK at the time because I was going to do a concentration in the Wars of the Roses. And I was traveling a lot and was sitting at a lot of bus stations, train stations, airports, thinking like, how do people fill up this time? Seems to be a bookstore at every one of these things. Maybe I should go check out what that's about. And then started reading again and sort of discovered YA as a new, and what for me at the time was the most exciting thing. I would pick up adult books from these bookstores and like maybe two of them, but mostly they were too slow for me and kind of took me back to those feelings of being a young adult and feeling like books were not written for me because they were too complicated or too slow or what have you. And so YA really spoke to me because it was fast paced. It happened right away. It was about coming of age, which I still very much felt like I was doing at age 20. And I still feel like I'm doing now. And I think that's part of the appeal of YA is that as adults, we never feel like we stop coming of age and we never feel like we figure it out. And we never feel like we have all the answers. And I think reading YA can kind of take some of the pressure off you because you're interacting with these very literal coming of age stories. So I don't know if I was destined to write YA. I definitely, my professor at the time who I was supposed to be working with on my thesis told me I couldn't write my history papers like novels, and I couldn't like write dialogue between Henry V and Richard III, and I couldn't dramatize the Battle of Agincourt. And I was like, well, that's really what I want to be doing. And she's like, you should probably write something else then. So it all feels kind of faded when I look back on it now, but at the time I just remember feeling so like lost and like I'd thrown away this career that I had kind of had my heart set on, but it led me over here. All that being said, I think I will probably write other things someday because that's the fun of it, is experimenting with form and experimenting with genre. And I want to write everything. I want to tell all different stories in all different ways.
That's great. Your line that like we never stop coming of age, I think is like the perfect explanation of the appeal of YA lit. I think it's wonderful. All right, we're gonna sell some books. We're gonna start to do some book recs. And I want to remind the audience, the online audience in future time, that we are not just idly talking about books. We're talking about books so that you go buy them. We're going to be and not just buy them anywhere. You buy them from the King's English. The links are going to be in the chat. You can get Mackenzi's books. You can get signed copies of Mackenzi's books. You can pre-order Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks. And also follow Mackenzi on Instagram. The link is also in the chat right now at the Mackenzi Lee. Okay, Mackenzi, you're going to lead off. What are you reading and what are you excited about right now?
Are we going to do like a bounce back and forth thing, or do I just go for all of it?
You can just go. Just let it rip, and then we'll go to Calvin after you, because Calvin's got like a deep well. If you mention something, he'll be fine.
Well, I was like, I used to play a game with my sister where we'd go back and pick a category, and you'd like go back and forth until one of you couldn't think of anything in that category. And so I was thinking Calvin and I would just do that.
You can do that. Go for it. Love it. Go for it. Go for it.
So I'm literally looking around my shelves right now and thinking about the 10,000 books I could talk about. So we just finished, I have a visual aid. We just finished October, and so nobody wants horror novels now, but because why? But I want everybody to want this horror novel, which is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This book is gross. That would probably be the first word. I did the audiobook of this one and was walking around Target and had to like stop and just like dry heave for a second. Target. It is such a fascinating play with genre tropes within horror while also being something totally its own. So it's about I can't remember her name because I'm not good at character names. Jade. So it's about a teenage girl named Jade. It is an adult novel in spite of having a teen lead character. And she lives in a small town in Idaho, and she becomes convinced, and there is not sure if this is because of real things that are happening or because of maybe her own kind of mental illness affecting her, but she becomes convinced that her town is about to become the site of a slasher, essentially. It's a slasher film, but without the film element. And Jade is a big slasher person, and so she starts identifying in the town around her all of the tropes that are going to happen in a slasher film. And she goes, okay, so this is going to be the first kill. This is the sign. And she identifies in particular who the final girl is going to be. And she decides it's her job to train and protect and prepare this final girl to face the slasher that is eventually going to take over their town. It is totally unexpected. I love books where you kind of can't tell if there's something magic going on or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of this book is that you kind of don't know if there's actually something supernatural and suspicious and if we actually should be getting prepared, or if this is just a young woman who has like a deep disturbed psychosis. And it's so compelling. I absolutely love this book. Like I said, it's so gross. I don't want to spoil it, but like the last act of it is just like a bloodbath like I have never read in a novel before. And it's so great. It's so great. And I love it as both like a really self-aware horror novel, but also a horror novel that totally stands on its own and is actually terrifying, and not just, it transcends sort of critiquing the genre it's part of.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. Oh my gosh, that was a great sales pitch.
So, and to think I picked it up just because of the title, because I love a weird title.
It's a great title. My Heart is a Chainsaw. All right, Calvin, I guess we're over to you. What do you got?
Okay, well, I have a very low battery on my phone, so if I disappear, it's not because I ran scared from Mackenzi's reviews.
We understand.
What they all say.
Lauren Groff's book, The Matrix, was my most surprising recent read. I didn't know what I was getting into, and then I sat down on a day off and read through the whole book. And similar to Mackenzie, I like that. Was it magic? Was it a visitation? You know, is there a holy influence here, or is it just our own psychosis? And that element plays really well with that. Plus, it's great historical fiction. It's an abeus, which is not history that I had thought I would be interested in, and there's a little lesbianism, which I think I appreciate in all my works, all my books.
Great rec. That is definitely a hot title this season. We're going to run down on time and we're going to kill Calvin's phone. So let's do like one more. Let's do one more. Mackenzie, give us one more.
Visual aid again. Okay, so over the pandemic, I got really into the show Peaky Blinders, which is a show about Birmingham gangs in the 90s.
Yes.
And I have been searching for like the book equivalent of Peaky Blinders, which I wanted something that was like gangsters and families and the sort of like the unofficial street violent gang things. Anyways, Jade City by Fonda Lee, which is just about to have the third book in the series come out too. So if you start it now, you can blast through the whole thing. You don't have to wait. It's set in a sort of faux 1920s. It's kind of in our world, but kind of not in our world. It's fantasy about this island where they mine and manufacture this type of jade that gives the bearer of it superhuman strength. And so it's about these two rival gang families in this city who are fighting for control of the jade trade and fighting for sort of control of this city and control of the industry. And it is world building like I've never seen before. It is so intricate and detailed, and there's lots of points of view, which usually I don't like, but in this case, I really, really like hooked on to every single. That's usually my issue with multiple points of view is there's always one that I like better than the others, and I'm like, okay, can we get to the next one? But with this one, I was so hooked into every character, and she handles an ensemble cast so brilliantly. And Fonda and I actually had our first books come out the same year. And I want to evangelize for her first book too, which is criminally underread. It's a book called Zero Boxer, that is about zero gravity boxing on the moon, which just like, come on. She has these incredible high concepts and then she executes them flawlessly. And the details in this world building, I cannot get enough of this world. And I want to live in this book and this violent, it's also very gross. I'm currently recommending a lot of gross books, but it also kind of scratches that itch of Peaky Blinders where they're like, everyone will go to whatever lengths it takes to protect their family and protect their home. So
that's great. Jade City, that's such a great. I'm a huge Peaky Blinders fan, so you've totally sold me. That's great. All right, Calvin, give us one more. What do you think?
I'll be short. Lincoln Highway, Amor Towles' book. I went into it with high expectations. They exceeded. This is one of the best books I've ever read. It is, even though it doesn't take place here in the West, it has that Western tone, which having missed this part of the West for quite a few years, it was refreshing to have that kind of that Western voice that is not California in characters. And again, a little historical fiction following the Lincoln Highway when there actually was a Lincoln Highway and not I-80. So
great rec. Absolutely great rec. That's fabulous. Thank you both so much. I feel like I could talk to both of you all afternoon, but Calvin's phone is going to conk out. And
I got more book racks.
What's that?
I got more book racks. I can do this all day.
I can do it all day for book racks. I mean, I want to remind the online audience that you should be buying these books right now. You may have heard about something called supply chain issues. So don't wait for the holidays. Head to the King's English Online. Pick up all of the books you need. Definitely pick up Mackenzie's books. Pre-order The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks. Get a signed copy. Go to a live online event on November 16th.
I'll add about the online event. Please buy the book from independent bookstores, but also if you don't buy the book, the event's open to everybody. You don't have to buy the book to come.
Awesome. Everybody to show up. Everybody to show up. That is fabulous. This is our 75th episode. Thank you all so much for being here. Next week, it is our second annual holiday show in which I will be appearing with my co-host, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, to talk about all of our favorite books of 2021, tell you what to buy and where to buy them. We will definitely be talking about Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks once again. Calvin Crosby, The King's English, Mackenzi Lee, Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks. Thank you both so much for being with us today. It's been such a complete pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, to the online audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting independent bookstores. Stay well. Keep reading.